This next batch of paths that we're going to be using the pen tool to create are where things get a little wavy. I've named each of these paths. We've got an ant leg, seagull, fishing hook, and sine wave. And you'll notice that all of them have some curve incorporated in the design. The way I like to think about creating these curves is imagine that this curve is a roller coaster. And think about what the peak or the valley of this line would be. For example, with the seagull, we've got this curve here, which peaks about here, and that's when it stops going up and starts going down. Here with the sine wave, you can really see it, where we started this peak, goes all the way down, and here's the valley, and then it goes back up to another peak, and down to a final valley. But some of these other ones get a little more complicated. We've got a peak here, and then it kind of comes down, and then if you tilt your head, you can see that, oh yeah, there's like a valley somewhere over there, and then it just kind of just swirls around and becomes a loop. So we're going to start with this ant leg over here, and it's going to teach us how to connect a curved path to a straight path. So I'm going to start in the top left on this anchor. I'm going to click my anchor in the top left here, and I'm going to think about where the peak of this curve might be. So if I think of this as a roller coaster, I can imagine the cart going up and up and up. And I tilt my head to the right, I can kind of see it a little better. And about here is where it starts to stall out and then come back down. So I'm going to click and drag here to make this path match the path below it, like so. And there's the left half of that. That's looking good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover. I'm just going to move my mouse to bring it about here. And this is where the bottom, this is where the valley of this path lies. And same thing, I can actually click and drag it to match this curve a little bit better. Like so. And now what I want to do is I need to finish this path by going here. But you'll notice that if I click, it's going to make a curved path. And I want it to reset and just become a straight path like the typical pen tool would be. So I'm actually just going to Command Z. And so here I am, I'm back at this path. I still have this curve, but if I click back on that point, I can reset it. So now this next line segment that I draw will no longer have a curve. It's going to reset to be a straight path like so. And once you have that done, you can hit Escape, and this path is complete. Next up, I'm going to work on this seagull. And seagull starts very similarly to ant leg, where it starts here to the left. I think about the peak of this curve, this roller coaster, it's about there. I click and drag, like so, to match the left half. And then I bring that there. And sometimes you'll notice that you're a little bit off, or this curve is a little too, what's it called? A little too wide. So I'm actually just going to Command Z back, and rather than doing my peak about here, which I originally did, I'm just going to bring it to about here and try to get this a little better. And there you go. So here it's a little bit under, but you'll notice that it's always a little safer to undershoot your curve, because then you can click and drag to fine tune it like so. So now I got to get the right side of the seagull to match the left side of the seagull. But we're going to run into the same problem we had on the ant leg, where if I click and drag, and even if I'm adding these curves to it, I'm still going to get this weird section where it kind of curves out a little bit and it doesn't close here and become a nice fine point. So I can Command Z and go back to here, and just like with my ant leg, I can click from this point, and you'll see in the bottom right of my pen tool, I have this slash sign. That slash means to remove the curve, and whatever curve it's currently on here, you'll see the handles, and that's that curve. If I go to my pen tool, click on it, it's going to reset, and now when I do the same thing and try to match my curves, you'll see that this point here in the middle is this nice tip that we're trying to get. Okay, so there's seagull and antleg. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into fishing hook. And you'll notice with fishing hook, here we don't really have any points or ends. So this is going to be a test in us to see where our peaks and valleys might be. So I'm going to start with my pen tool again, go in the top left, and imagine my roller coaster. Here's the top of my coaster, and I'm going to get this to match by clicking and dragging. There's that. And now I'm going to go here, and again I've got my coaster that's coming down here. But here is when, about here is when this path starts or stops being this very steep slope and starts becoming this wider slope down here. I'm going to call this a bend. So this is like the middle of my bend, where again it starts off steep and then becomes wider and shallow. So I'm going to click and drag from this bend to get that like so. And I'm going to think of my valley being about here. There we are. So now I'm here and I'm trying to continue this curve, and it's pretty big, so I'm going to do it in about 3 parts, where I go sloping down. I'm imagining this is my peak coming down to this valley, coming over here, which is when this path stops having the same curve and starts becoming a little steeper and curving in. And I'm clicking and dragging on the end to close that curve. And if ever you have a point where it's not quite right, like say here, I drew that and it wasn't totally right, I can go back to my direct selection and I can click and drag it over, and I can even play with these handles to bring the curve in or out to better match. All right, so that's my fishing hook, and now the last one we're going to do is the sine wave. And I mentioned in the last video about how the pen tool keeps the momentum of whatever curve you had before it. Here we have this path that actually starts with some momentum. It starts not on a straight path, but actually on a curve. I can give my path some momentum without having to actually draw a line. So if I start with this anchor here, I can click and drag in the direction of which way I'm going. In this case, it's to the right. And I'm going to click and drag it to about halfway between, actually a little less than halfway, more like a third between here and this valley down here. I'm going to bring it like so. And now I'm going to skip ahead to about here, because I've got this nice path that kind of mirrors here to here. If I go to my valley down here, I can click and drag. I can click and drag to get this bottom half to match like so. Now here, I didn't quite get it right, but I'm actually just going to continue this path to get the rest of it set up. All right. So we'll notice that after you get that first one here lined up right, the other ones are going to be a lot easier because you've already established a sense of momentum, and the rest all kind of mirror each other, and they look nice and smooth. So like I said in the last one, I can actually use my direct selection tool, select that first point, and drag it forward to get that first part of this path to match. And there's the sine wave. This is an introduction to some curves you're going to notice in the last part of our assignment. Remember these ant legs, seagulls, fishing hooks, and sine waves, and it will help in the final part of this exercise.